guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about jigs today. This is something I plan on fishing a little bit more. Everybody's telling me you get real big bites, or real big fish I should say, off these jigs, even if you don't get a lot of bites from them. So I've done a little bit of research. One that I really want to call out is a Fluke Master video that I took a lot away from. I'll try and find it and link to it below. The other one is a little bit more about how crawfish act, and it's an article that I have on my Facebook page. If you guys are following me on Facebook, you've probably already seen it. So let me share a little bit what I learned about these things, and then we'll put it to practice in the summer and see how close some of this jig theory came. Alright, so I got the article up on my PC. Hopefully I remember everything it says. But basically what it's saying is the crawfish kind of like burrow themselves into the mud or dirt or rocks or whatever during the winter. And then when the water gets to about 50, they say. Now again, this is depending on your lake and latitude and stuff like that. But basically around 50, they start to come out. And they're going to come out where the rocks are the first little bit. Which is probably why we find all these bass in the rocks first thing in the spring. But they start to come out and do their little mating ritual and stuff like that. And then when their mating ritual finishes, they actually go back into the rocks. So you got that small little area of time where they come out, they mate, lay their eggs and everything, and then they molt. And molting is apparently when the bass really go after them, obviously because they don't have, that hard protective shell, or from my understanding anyway. And that happens again in the fall during the feed up. So in the fall they come out and they kind of do that whole same ritual again. My understanding is that it's kind of still around that temperature zone, but I guess fall has kind of a longer span of time for that temperature zone to be there. And that's how I understood the article. Again, it's on my Facebook page. Check it out. So let's get into the types of jigs and where to use them and when to use them. All right, let's talk about the parts of the jig. So you have yourself the line tie. And there's really kind of two kinds. There's one that'll go in the front, which is more of a kind of swim jig type, and then you have some that are kind of up off the front of the jig, up towards the head, which are more kind of like a cover jig. You have the weed guard, which kind of prevents weeds from getting caught up in your hook here. You have the skirt, which you can get in like a million different colors. You have the hook. Depending on what the jig's for, you'll have a thick hook for thick cover and a smaller hook if there's less cover. Some jigs come with rattles, and so I don't know if you guys can hear that, but this one has 2 rattles on it. And skirts are changeable, just so you know. If you want, you can rip off this skirt if it's damaged and just replace it. Alright, let's talk about jig types. So there's really kind of a few that I consider to be main, or at least when I was doing my research, these are the ones that are talked about the most. So these are the ones I'm going to talk about. The first one is a rounded head. Rounded heads kind of have the line tie a little bit more up top, and they're considered finesse jigs or just round head jigs. And I've read that G-Man actually uses these for, flipping and pitching under docks. Now the hooks usually kind of sit flat, so they'll sit flat on the bottom, and then as you're dragging them with the line tie, because the line tie is pointed up, it's actually going to start coming up and move that hook away from the rocks and drag it over, and then when you sit it back down, it'll go back down. Now obviously that's not good for weeds, because you're going to kind of get yourself all hung up in the weeds with this, but it is good for rocks, which, as we talked about before, is where they start out. Alright, the next one is a football head shape. And the football head shape is good for rocks for sure. It just kind of, it doesn't fall over as easy and get mashed in between the rocks. You notice this one here, the hook actually stands up a little bit higher too. So when they come down on it, it's just a little bit easier to pull that hook set. Now this type of jig, you're going to want to retrieve a little bit slower. So you're just going to kind of hop it. And actually, if you read that article, that small hopping and smashing onto the rocks is actually the same sound that a crawfish makes. So whenever you hear that click, 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 that's the same what a crawfish makes, which is apparently why these guys excel so much. The next one's a swim head type, and you can see this one, Fluke Master actually kind of pointed it out, and I noticed it was that this kind of looks like a spinnerbait head. And that's really what this is. It's just a spinnerbait without the arm and the blades. And there are kind of different heads that you can get for swim jigs. So for an example, this one here is a Booyah swim jig, and it's kind of like an arrowhead, and it's flat, and this is their version of the swim jig. It's a little bit smaller. The next one is probably the one that I'm going to be using the most, and it's the Archy Head. And I've got a bunch of Archy Heads, which is great because the Archy Head, you can see it's kind of got a round but flatter type head. The line tie is kind of in the middle. It's not really up, but it's not really forward, and it kind of sits nice. It sits flat when you got it on the bottom. It can also be fished through cover, and it's kind of that all-terrain in the middle, good for everything. I would call it a beginner jig, to be honest with you. There's so many things that you can do with this. So this is probably the one that I'm going to be using the most, and this is the one that I got the most of. Alright, so then the next one is going to be the Flippin Jig. Now the Flippin Jig has usually a really heavy head. You can see that the line tie is recessed into the head, and the hook itself is super thick. So I mean, there's no bend in that thing. The weed guard's a little bit more stiff, and it's meant for throwing into the thickest stuff that you can find. Weeds, lily pads, bulrushes, anything that you got. This is supposed to be the 4x4 of the jig world. So that's kind of it, guys. Those are the major ones that I'm going to be fishing this summer. Where I'm going to be fishing them, how I'm going to be fishing them. The last thing is the equipment. It looks like most people are saying that a medium heavy, this is a 7-foot Ardent Edge medium heavy rod, and a nice fast reel. So this one here is a 7.3 to 1. It's also an Ardent. That's it for gear. I hope this helps somebody. I'm hoping this is going to help me remember what I need to do in the jig world, and I know I'll probably return back to it to try and remember some of the stuff that I've talked about. So hopefully it helps you do the same thing. But I'm rambling, so that's it. That's the end of it. I'll just leave you with some parting words from Mr. Swindle. See you guys.
People say, what color jig you fish? A brown one? Any other color? I throw a black when it's muddy. You ever change it up? Yeah, sometimes I throw the black and then I throw the brown. When they don't bite the brown, I throw the black. And if they don't bite the black, then I'll go back and throw the brown. I don't need 71 jig colors in the floor of my boat. If he's that smart, he's smarter than me.